Ancient Rome did not hide its violence, it celebrated it. In the heart of the empire, beneath marble statues and towering columns, blood soaked into sand as entertainment for the masses. The Roman games were not side attractions or fringe events. They were central to Roman identity, politics, and culture. To understand Rome is to understand why tens of thousands of citizens would gather in amphitheaters to cheer as men, women, animals, and even children died before their eyes. These games were carefully organized, heavily funded, and deeply symbolic. What shocks the modern world today once represented power, order, and control to the Romans themselves. Gladiatorial combat stands as the most famous and misunderstood of all Roman games. Contrary to popular belief, these fights did not begin as casual entertainment, but as funeral rituals meant to honor the dead. Wealthy Roman families believed bloodshed appeased spirits, and over time this ritual transformed into a massive public spectacle. Gladiators were usually slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals, though some free men volunteered, driven by desperation or the lure of fame. They trained in specialized schools under harsh conditions, learning distinct fighting styles designed to maximize drama rather than efficiency. Death was not guaranteed in every fight, but it was always close. When it came, it was public, ceremonial, and final, with the crowd often deciding a wounded man's fate through gestures and shouts. Even more terrifying than gladiator combat was damnatio ad bestias, a form of execution that involved condemning a person to be torn apart by wild animals. This punishment was reserved for criminals, deserters, slaves, and later Christians, and it was deliberately staged as public entertainment. Victims were sometimes stripped naked, tied to stakes, or forced to play mythological roles before being attacked. Lions, bears, leopards, and bulls, imported from the farthest corners of the empire, were starved to ensure aggression. The arena echoed with screams as animals mauled living humans, and the crowd watched not in horror but fascination. For Romans, this was justice made visible. The venations, or wild beast hunts, took brutality to an industrial scale. These events transformed the arena into a slaughterhouse where trained hunters, gladiators, and condemned prisoners faced waves of animals. Thousands of creatures could be killed in a single festival. Exotic species such as elephants, rhinoceroses, giraffes, and crocodiles were captured, transported across continents, and forced into combat for Roman amusement. Entire species were pushed toward extinction purely to satisfy the empire's appetite for spectacle. These hunts were not about survival or sport. They were theatrical demonstrations of Rome's dominance over nature itself. Among the most astonishing and horrifying spectacles were the naumachia, or mock naval battles. These were not simple reenactments, but full-scale combats staged on flooded arenas or artificial lakes. Real ships were built, crews manned by prisoners and slaves, and battles fought until one side was annihilated. Thousands could die in a single event, drowning, burning, or being hacked apart in close combat. Emperors like Julius Caesar and Augustus used naumachia to display wealth, engineering power, and absolute authority. The sheer logistics of flooding arenas and coordinating naval warfare for entertainment revealed just how far Rome would go to astonish its people. Not all executions were swift. One of the most cruel methods used during the games was the tunica molesta, a shirt soaked in flammable substances and placed on a condemned person before being set alight. Victims burned alive in full view of the audience, sometimes as part of mythological reenactments. A criminal portraying Hercules might be burned at the stake, or someone cast as Icarus would fall to their death. These were not symbolic performances. They were real executions disguised as drama. The screams, smoke, and smell of burning flesh were part of the experience. Midday performances in Roman arenas were often reserved for what historians call fatal charades. These were theatrical executions where prisoners reenacted famous myths, only to die in ways that mirrored the stories. Unlike actors, these performers had no script, no safety, and no escape. A man playing Orpheus might be torn apart by animals, while another portraying Daedalus would be thrown from a height. The crowd knew these deaths were real, and that knowledge heightened the thrill. Art, mythology, and cruelty merged into a single deadly performance. Public crucifixions also formed part of Rome's culture of spectacle. Though often associated with quiet roadsides, crucifixion was sometimes staged near or within arenas to maximize visibility. Victims could be left alive for days, slowly dying from exposure, dehydration, or infection. This was not just punishment, but psychological warfare. Rome used suffering as a warning, a message carved into human flesh, reminding the population of the cost of rebellion or disobedience. Even within gladiatorial combat, some fighting styles were designed to amplify fear. Retiari fought with nets and tridents, evoking helplessness and suspense. Laquiari used lassos to strangle opponents, while Esidari battled from chariots, crashing into enemies at speed. Each style told a story, and each death fed the crowd's hunger for novelty. Gladiators became celebrities, but their fame was fragile, always shadowed by the certainty of death. Some emperors took the brutality further by placing themselves at the center of it. Emperor Commodus famously fought as a gladiator, killing animals and opponents in staged combats while the crowd was forced to cheer. Though his matches were rigged, his obsession with arena violence revealed how deeply the games were tied to imperial identity. For emperors, hosting ever more shocking spectacles was a way to assert dominance, distract the masses, and reinforce loyalty through fear and awe. The Roman games were never meaningless cruelty. They were tools of control, propaganda, and unity. By offering free entertainment soaked in blood, rulers kept the population occupied and emotionally invested in the empire. Bread and circuses was not a metaphor. It was policy. The games reinforced social hierarchies, normalized violence, and reminded everyone, from senator to slave, of Rome's absolute power. Eventually, the empire changed. As Christianity spread and economic pressures mounted, public tolerance for such extreme brutality waned. Gladiator fights were banned in the early 5th century, though animal hunts continued longer. The arenas fell silent, their stones stained with the memory of centuries of bloodshed. Today, the ruins stand as monuments not only to Roman engineering, but to humanity's capacity to turn suffering into spectacle. What shocks us now once thrilled an empire. The Roman games were not accidents of history, but deliberate choices made by a society that equated power with dominance and entertainment with death. To study them is not just to look backward in horror, but to reflect on how easily violence can be normalized when it serves authority, identity, and control.